Part 43. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Wich Jong Word. Chapter 421. Chapter 421. Sunian's equipment has arrived. Sunian got the clothing company and started looking at various documents. I have to say that this leading company is really different. There is no need to mention various profits. Sunian did a rough calculation and found that the annual revenue alone is as high as several billion. She estimated that Huo Linyuan must have gone crazy now. After all, she got it while he was mentally tense and could even be said to have lost his mind. Sunian also knew very well how many minefields there were in this company. You have to think carefully about how to use this thunder. Madam, Miss Sun just sent you a box of things. Do you want to open it here or somewhere else? At this time, the servant came to Sunian's side and said respectfully. Sunian's eyes suddenly lit up when he heard this. Give me the things and I will take care of them myself. This box is a little big and heavy. If you move it yourself, madam, you might be tired, so I'll do it. But Sunian shook his head. I'm not tired, I'm really not tired at all. The things in this box are really important to me. I must come in person, otherwise, I won't be relieved. Sunian has said this, so what else can the servant do? He can only respectfully hand the things in his hands to Sunian's hands. Sunian then excitedly carried the things to the room. After opening it, I saw a box full of clothes. Every woman will be happy when she sees new clothes. Especially these clothes are very important to Sunian, very important. Sunian fiddled with the clothes in his hands, and while fiddling with them, he sighed, if Li Baikan doesn't obediently give me the seeds this time, then I will have to use coercive measures. When he said this, Sunian's eyes were firm. This made Li Baikan, who was far away in the company, sneeze directly. He took out a tissue casually. Josu, who was next to him, immediately said thoughtfully, Mr. Li, is the temperature of the air conditioner a little low? If it is, I will turn up the temperature right away. No need. Li Baikan put the finished document aside, and then scanned the entire office. It doesn't feel too cold, I just feel a little deserted. Josu. As Li Baikan's personal assistant, Josu certainly knew what he meant. But he glanced at his mouth inwardly. After all, they entered here before, but they were afraid of making any noise. I still dislike the coldness, so I just say that I miss my wife directly, and still beat around the bush. Li Baikan really missed the little woman at home. In order to act, Sunian has to confinement at home this month and cannot come to the company this month. Without her voice, he really felt that the whole world was quiet. It's really not something I'm used to. But what else can be done? She said that if you want to act well, then you must act well. After all, following your wife's instructions is the most basic rule for a husband. Li Baikan sighed and read the document faster again. Then get off work on time at 6 o'clock. Get home as quickly as possible after get off work. The moment he entered the house, Li Baikan immediately grabbed a maid and asked, where is the wife? Today, Miss Sun sent a box of things to my wife. My wife was very happy after receiving it, so she took it to the room to unpack it. End of this chapter. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Wich Jong Word. Chapter 422. Chapter 422, No beast is big enough to attack a patient. Very happy. Hearing this, Li Baikan couldn't help but frown. You must know that before, he let go of so many things from Sunian, but Sunian was not really happy. Sun Ying'er gave her something that would make her happy. He should study hard. Li Baikan took off his suit jacket and put it on his hands casually. When he arrived at Sunian's room, he knocked gently on the door, but received no response. He walked in. When he saw the bright lights in the bathroom, his face darkened. You have to know that it is not yet 7 o'clock in the evening, and Sun Ying'er has given her a gift, then it is very likely that it is because of Sun Ying'er's gift. What on earth did Sun Ying'er give that made Sun Nian pay so much attention to it? Then Li Baikan scanned the entire room with his eyes. Then he saw a pile of clothes on Su's bed. Could it be clothes? In order to try on the clothes given by Sun Ying'er, I actually took a shower. He wanted to take a closer look at what kind of clothes this was. I walked to the bed immediately. But after he saw the clothes on the bed are either as thin as cicada wings or all kinds of, for example, kittens, little leopard prints. These things. Li Baikan immediately began to think about how to make these things disappear. After all, he really had no confidence in his self-control. When he heard the sound of someone coming out of the bathroom, he directly chose to run away. When he returned to his room, Li Baikan couldn't help but start thinking. Think about what Sun Nian would look like if she put on those clothes. Everyone has bad elements in their heart. Why does Li Baikan feel that the day is coming when he will give up? He closed his eyes and began to think about how he could get those things away without anyone noticing. This is really a bit difficult. Sun Nian tried on the clothes after taking a shower. Very satisfied. The next step is to look for opportunities. She has to think carefully about what opportunities to look for. While eating, I was still thinking. This was what Li Baikan, who had been restrained for a long time, heard as soon as he stepped into the restaurant. Hey, what opportunity should I look for? What kind of opportunity can I wear those clothes naturally and jump into it naturally? But this guy keeps saying he loves me, so I might as well wear it directly. After all, he usually talks sweetly so easily, and there should be no chance of me showing up in those clothes again and asking me why I am posing. Li Baikan. I wore those clothes, jumped directly on him, and then sat on him. Li Baikan couldn't listen anymore. If he continued to listen, he would really end up leaving his father and leaving his son. Immediately, I started coughing on purpose, and the cough was very loud. Sun Nian came back to his senses and immediately became concerned. Baikan, are you okay? Why did you cough suddenly, and you coughed so hard? I'm fine. You suddenly coughed so hard, are you really okay? Sun Nian stood up, walked to Li Baikan, and patted his back gently to help him breathe. Why is my sudden cough so severe? It seems like I want to cough my lungs out. Generally, if a person in good health suddenly falls ill, it is a serious illness. Hearing that Sun Nian was so anxious, Li Baikan felt happy. Even in my heart, I care about him. It seems that I really care about him this time. Li Baikan felt that this little woman should be a little tempted by him. But I was happy for less than 3 seconds. If he is sick now, then I can't attack him to get the seeds. After all, I am not a beast enough to attack a sick person. Li Baikan. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Wich Jong Word. Chapter 423. Chapter 423. Li Baikan is sick. It's just that my throat is a little uncomfortable. It's okay. After saying this, he coughed heavily again. He suddenly felt that this was a good way to get sick. You're coughing so hard, how can you say it's okay? Do you think I'm stupid when you're like this? Only then did Sun Nian remember that Li Baikan had a fight with Huo Linyuan that day and suddenly fainted. How can a good person faint suddenly? There must be something going on. She has seen how busy Li Baikan has been at work these days. Thinking of this, Sun Nian quickly asked the housekeeper to arrange for a doctor to come. Li Baikan followed Sun Nian back to the room obediently. Looking at Sun Nian giving various orders seriously, Li Baikan felt his heart suddenly warm even though he knew very clearly that he was just taking advantage of the unborn child. The final diagnosis given by the family doctor was that I had a cold, or a severe cold, and needed a good rest. After the family doctor finished speaking, there was a man lying on the bed with a weak look on his face. When Sunian heard that it was a cold, she subconsciously breathed a sigh of relief, but she still walked to Li Baikan with a worried look on her face. "Baikan, do you want to go to the hospital for a checkup? After all, your health was quite good before. After the fight with Huo Linyuan, I suddenly fell ill. You should have a checkup to see if there is anything wrong with your body." Li Baikan smiled, "It's nothing, just a little cough. And I am also a human being. As long as I am a human being, I will inevitably get sick. After all, I also eat whole grains, so I just need to rest for a few days. Yes, you shouldn't go to the company these days. Just have a good rest. You don't usually get sick. If you get sick all of a sudden, it must be serious." After saying this, Sunian hurriedly helped. He gathered up the quilt. Li Baikan looked at her quietly, as if he were a good baby. In order to make the disease more real, Li Baikan asked Josu to explain it to the company. Sunian originally wanted to take care of him. But this illness was originally because he was trying to delay time and waited until Sunian had forgotten those things, so he secretly disposed of them without anyone noticing. All these plans were directly interrupted by the old man. Li Jianhong came to Li Baikan's room with a serious look on his face. "What's wrong? Why did he suddenly become ill?" "It's nothing, I just contracted some cold." There is always a lack of intimacy between father and son. Especially adult father and son. Li Jianhong felt a little relieved when he heard this. Then he looked at Sunian beside him, and his face fell. Sunian's heart suddenly thumped when the old man looked at her like this. After all, as a wife, it is her responsibility to take care of her husband. "Nian, why are you here? How can you be so close to him? What kind of body is he? What kind of body are you? What if he passes the disease to you?" These words made Sunian a little confused. Then the old man continued, "How about this? Nian and I will go back to my old house in the next few days. When Baikan is well, you can come back." Li Baikan. When Sunian heard this, he subconsciously refused. "Dad, I understand your good intentions, but Baikan is like this." Sunian was interrupted by the old man before he finished speaking. Nian, I understand what you want to say, but don't forget that in the eyes of people outside, you are just confinement. If you stay like this, so what do people outside think?" As a father, Li Jianhong could tell at a glance that someone was pretending when he walked in. Especially when I saw Sunian looking worried. He understood instantly. Haha. You must know that when he heard that this guy Li Baikan was sick, he immediately ran over non-stop. As a result, he had to break this brat's plan. End of this chapter. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Wich Jong Word. Chapter 424. Chapter 424 The Best Father-in-Law. Li Baikan naturally didn't want to be separated from Sunian. But the old man didn't give him a chance to speak at all. "Baikan, do you have any opinion? Do you also want to see Nian get sick? Do you also want Nian to accompany you when sick?" When he said this, the old man he sighed deliberately. "Hey, how could I think so? Baikan, you are a grown man after all. How could you bear to see your woman get sick?" Li Baikan. What else can he do? I could only watch Sunian being taken away, and I could only cough a few times deliberately when Sunian left. Sunian was naturally worried when he heard such a cough, but the old man pulled the person away directly. "Don't worry anymore," Li Jianhong said, looking at Sunian, who kept looking out the car window. Sunian quickly looked away. Nian, although this brat has turned around now, don't behave too well. If you behave too well, then he may not cherish it too much. Leave him temporarily for a few days and let him sit in the cold for a few days. The bench, at this time, he will think more about you. Sunian certainly knew that the old man was doing this for her own good, so he nodded obediently. Seeing Sunian acting so well behaved, the old man was in a particularly good mood. They say that a son-in-law is half a son, so his daughter-in-law is also half a daughter. Of course he must take good care of his daughter. Anyway, he is better than that stinky boy Lee Baiken. Especially when he saw Sunian acting so well behaved, the old man really felt like his heart melted. Nian, although dad is old, he is still a man, so you are right to listen to me. And I also arranged for people to keep an eye on me, so you don't have to worry about other beauties showing up while you are not around Baiken. Just stay with me. Sunian was completely relieved now. Arrived at the old house. Sunian was shocked as soon as he entered the door. The reason for this is that Sunian did not expect that Sun Ying'er was also there. She walked to Sun Ying'er with a face filled with surprise. "Sister, why are you here?" The old man's voice sounded from behind her. "I brought your sister over. After all, what's the point of staying with my old man? You young people should play with young people. Miss Sun, please excuse me. Please accompany me to read Nian. If you need anything, just tell the steward." Sunian looked at the old man happily. "Thank you, Dad." The butler next to him saluted respectfully. "Okay, an old man, have to take a nap. You guys can watch and play," Li Jianhong said and walked inside. "I rushed to see that brat Lee Baiken today and didn't sleep well at all. He needs to catch up on his sleep." After the old man left, Sun Ying'er asked curiously, "By the way, Nian, why did you suddenly go back to the old house? Do you know? Someone suddenly picked me up at home today, and I was shocked. What happened? What's going on?" Sun Ying'er certainly knew that the relationship between Sunian and Lee Baiken was not good in the past, so she had been living with the old man in the old house. Now that she suddenly moved to the old house, Sun Ying'er naturally subconsciously thought that something had happened. Sunian directly told Lee Baiken that he was sick and the old man had brought her there. When Sun Ying'er heard this, she couldn't help but start to envy. Nian, your father-in-law is really great. What a wonderful father-in-law he is. If Huo Linyuan's father could be like your father-in-law, then I would definitely marry him. Well, I think he is good too, just like my biological father." At this point, Sunian successfully left someone behind. End of this chapter. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Wich Jong Word. Chapter 425. Chapter 425. Master, I have been waiting for you for a long time. At night, Sunian was lying on the bed. Can't sleep no matter what. Her mind was filled with Lee Baiken. Even though she knew that Lee Baiken would have no problem at home, he had professional doctors and the highest grade medicines, and he needed to rest when he was sick. She might disturb him if she was by his side. But thinking about it this way, Sunian was still a little uneasy. At 1 o'clock in the evening, Sunian sat up directly from the bed. After all, she hasn't gotten the seeds yet. If something goes wrong with Lee Baiken, what will happen to Mo Bao? For Mo Bao, Lee Baiken must be in good health and there must be no so-called problems with his body. So Lee Baiken decided to go back and take a look now. Just do it. Sunian immediately put on his clothes and tiptoed to the garage. She lived in this old house all her life, and sometimes she needed to go out in the middle of the night to deal with things secretly, so she went out secretly. Soon, a car drove out of the Lee family's old residence. The silent old house soon returned to silence. However, the silence did not last long before it was broken. Lee Baiken came here secretly last time, and this time he was familiar with the road. After entering the old house, he easily found Sunian's bedroom. But when he saw the empty room, his expression immediately changed. However, he sat in the room and waited for a while. But he waited for about half an hour, but no one came back at all. Lee Baikan, who originally thought Sunian had gone out to pour water, was completely panicked. "Hurry and walk outside." Unexpectedly, as soon as he opened the door, he saw the housekeeper of the old house outside. Looking at this posture, he must have been waiting here for a long time. Lee Baikan's face suddenly turned dark. "Master, I have been waiting for you for a long time." Lee Baikan was not afraid that the old man would find him, but he was afraid that Sunian would find out that he was pretending to be ill. Although you can do it by pretending to be sick, it is still a bit embarrassing to be exposed in front of your own woman. But with the old man's attitude, it's impossible for him not to go. So Lee Baikan followed the housekeeper to the old man's room. Lee Jianhong, who was wearing pajamas, laughed when he saw Lee Baikan like this. "You are an adult after all. Why do you always do such childish things? Aren't you afraid that the news about you will be spread? Then you will really lose face no more light." Lee Baikan looked indifferent. "Didn't you do this when you were young?" "Haha, you think I am you? I never did this when I was young, and I even pretended to be sick. Do you know that? When I heard the news that you were feeling unwell today, I rushed to see you non-stop." What happened? Lee Jianhong felt more and more that his son was not considerate, like Sunian, who wanted to trick Huo Linyuan with a fake pregnancy, so he would call to talk to him if he was worried. "How does he look like this brat? Are you sure you didn't do it when you were young?" Lee Jianhong. This successfully reminded Lee Jianhong of the things he did when he was young. Well, he did do a lot of things, but he couldn't admit it. He definitely couldn't admit it. As long as he doesn't admit it, then Lee Baikan, the brat, won't know. That's right. It is not shameful to do anything to coax your own woman. And you used to blame me for not paying attention, but now I am. Not only do you not support me, but you are holding me back," Lee Baikan said calmly. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Wich Jong Word. Chapter 426. Chapter 426, Coincidence opens the door for coincidence. Coincidence is home. What do you mean by holding you back and pretending to be sick? You can use all these tricks. How could I give birth to such a shameless son like you? Lee Baikan naturally sat on the sofa in the room. It works. By the way, which room is Sunian in? Lee Jianhong glanced at this guy with disgust. "You don't think that I figured out that you were going to come here secretly, so I helped Nian change rooms in advance." This made Lee Baikan's body stiffen immediately. Lee Baikan did think so when he saw the housekeeper. But the old man's words immediately made him realize that something was wrong. "Lee Baikan, where is she?" "At 1 o'clock, she drove out alone." "If my guess is correct, she should have returned to your wedding room." When he said this, Lee Jianhong couldn't help but sigh. "In fact, from a certain perspective it seems that you two have a good understanding." Hearing this, Lee Baikan immediately stood up and walked straight outside. When Lee Jianhong saw him like this, he couldn't help but say, "If Nian were my daughter, then I would never let Nian come into contact with this brat. Old Shen, I really feel that I am doing something wrong." The housekeeper had stayed in the Lee family for many years and was familiar with the old man's temper. He smiled and said, "Master, you can't say that. The young master and the young mistress are getting better and better now. This is something you have been looking forward to for many years. You should be happy." "Happy? Who can be happy to be woken up in the middle of the night? Forget it, they are still young and they should work hard. After all, when I am so old, I can't work hard even if I want to. The housekeeper quickly supported the old man and accompanied him to the room. Lee Baikon's heart suddenly rose to his throat when he found out that Sunian was driving back so late. It's so late after all. Moreover, Huo Linyuan is so eyeing now. If that guy takes advantage of this moment to do anything to Sunian, the consequences will be really unimaginable. The more he thought about it, the harder Lee Baikon stepped on the accelerator. It can be said that he drove all the way here. Arrived at the place. When he saw the brightly lit house, he subconsciously breathed a sigh of relief. After entering the door, he asked the servant, "Where is the madam?" "My wife will be back in about 10 minutes. Hearing this, the stone in Lee Baikon's heart finally fell to the ground. I then hurriedly walked towards the room. After walking a few steps, I heard Sunian's voice. "Where did this guy go so late? Humph, he's still sick. He ran out and fooled around in the middle of the night. How could he get sick? Oops, I really have something wrong with my brain. Why are I running here in the middle of the night if I can't sleep well?" Lee Baikon's worries were completely dispelled. The next moment he raised his eyes, her figure appeared in his sight. Lee Baikon directly reached out and took the person into his arms. "Susu, you really scared me to death." In order to prevent Sunian from misunderstanding that he went somewhere to hang out, he immediately explained, "I went to the old house, but the old man told me that you left. It scared me to death. Fortunately, you are okay? If something happens to you, then..." Lee Baikon stopped talking here and stopped talking. Because nothing will happen to Sunian. Sunian didn't react until he heard this. Co-author tonight, she came here, while Lee Baikon went to the old house. How do you say this? It's really a coincidence that the mother opened the door for coincidence, and coincidence is home. End of this chapter. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Wich Jong Word. Chapter 427. Chapter 427. How can you act like a beast at this time? When Lee Baikon came to his senses, he felt that Sunian's body was unusually cold. It was then that he realized that Sunian's body would definitely not be able to support him after such a hard night. Immediately, he directly hit the person and picked him up. Then he strode to the room and tucked the person into the bed. But just when Lee Baikon was about to ask the servants to make soup, Sunian held his hand. "Don't forget where you are going. You are still sick. Don't run around." "I'm fine. I just want to ask the servant to make some hot soup for you." "Your hands are so cold now." Lee Baikon felt that Sunian's hands were as cold as ice cubes, without any heat at all. Sunian directly pulled the person to the bed. With lightning speed, he pinned the person down. "What kind of soup should you drink? Are you sick or am I sick? After all, the Chinese medicine I have been drinking for so long is definitely not in vain. My body is much better than yours." Just when Lee Baikon was about to say something, Sunian stared back fiercely. There was no other way, Lee Baikon could only stay quietly. "You also lie here, and neither of us wants to toss or get sick." Sunian, yeah. The two of them just lay quietly. Sunian listened to the man's breathing, and she felt a little more at ease. But why didn't this guy have a good rest in the middle of the night and ran to his old house? Just tossing it like this, does his body really not want it anymore? Hey, it is indeed a father and son. You must know that Mo Bao never had a good rest after he got sick in his previous life. He always made me worry at that time. I was still thinking that I was not so disobedient when I was young. I was also wondering if it was too much pampered children. After working on it for a long time, I found out that the root of this problem lies with the father. This bad habit can be inherited. Just as Sue was thinking about it, a broad arm hugged her directly. I don't feel at ease when you are not by my side. These words made Sunian's body tense up. She said angrily, I'm at my old house, and I'm not anywhere else. What's wrong with me? Lee Baiken hugged her tighter, trying to use the heat of his body to dispel the coldness on her body. I don't know why I'm like this, it's uncomfortable anyway. I just want to see you, although I knew before I went to the old house it's impossible to bring you back, so I thought that just one meeting with you would be enough. The man's slightly hot breath flowed into her neck, making her feel a little itchy on her neck. On the one hand, it was so late just to rush to see myself. Especially when Lee Baiken stepped up his efforts, Sunian felt as if the air was tight. I am really clingy when I am sick. However, it would be nice if he was this clingy as usual. If this guy was always so clingy, then I might have succeeded long ago. Iffier, Lee Baiken? Okay, it's almost 4 o'clock, go to sleep in the darkness. Lee Baiken's lips curled up unconsciously. Lee Baiken's words seemed to have some magic power. Sunian's eyelids instantly became heavy. Soon I fell into a dream. End of this chapter. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Wich Jong Word. Chapter 428. Chapter 428. Lee Baiken is really sick. However, Sunian didn't sleep for long before she woke up. After all, she sneaked out of the old house at night, so of course she had to go back early to avoid making the old man angry. Sunian originally planned to quietly get out of Lee Baiken's arms. But as soon as he moved, Lee Baiken's murmur sounded in his ears, don't move, sleep with me for a while longer. It's getting late now. I have to go back. If I don't go back, Dad will find out. He knows. The man made no intention of opening his eyes. Sunian was slightly startled when he heard this. But thinking about the way Lee Baiken went to the old house last night and came back in a hurry, he must have made a lot of noise and probably woke up the old man. When he thought of this, Sunian felt even more that he should go back. After all, the old man said that yesterday. Then I have to go back quickly. But Baiken, don't worry about it today. Just rest well at home. You know, Dad is actually very worried about you. Dad is so old after all. It's a bit wrong for you to make him so worried. Not good. Sunian chatted for a long time before realizing that something was right. Hurrying to push Lee Baiken away, he saw that Lee Baiken's face was a little red, and then he put his hand on his forehead. It doesn't matter if I don't let it go. Once I let it go, I was startled. Baiken, why is your forehead so hot? Do you have a fever? Then Sunian called the family doctor again. The family doctor originally thought he was here to go through the motions and cooperate with Lee Baiken's fun. I didn't know that. I was shocked when I took my body temperature and it was 39 degrees. Suddenly everyone became busy. Sunian suddenly felt nervous after seeing Lee Baiken's condition worsening. Just spent the whole morning like this. Lee Baiken's fever was finally gone. Lee Baiken opened his eyes again in the afternoon. The moment he opened his eyes, what he saw was Sunian's anxious face. Baiken, you're awake. How are you? Do you feel uncomfortable? You have a fever, and you have had a fever for a long time. Do you know? I'm fine, don't worry, but you can't stay here anymore, go back to your old house quickly. After Lee Baiken said this, he looked at Josu next to him. Josu, send your wife to your old house. Sunian didn't expect that Lee Baiken's first sentence after waking up would be this. But with Lee Baiken's current situation, how could she leave with peace of mind? Baiken, you are like this, how can I leave? I won't leave. Of course, Lee Baiken didn't want Sunian to be infected by his cold. After all, it would be fine if he felt uncomfortable. There was no need for both of them to feel uncomfortable. Susu, listen to me. I'm fine. You'd better go to the old house to stay for a few days. After a few days, can I pick you up in person? Don't get infected by me. And you also said that I had a fever for a long time just now. My body is very weak now and I need a good rest, so you follow Josu obediently. You now that I'm gone, I can sleep quietly for a while. Josu, who was next to him, also advised, Madam, just listen to Mr. Li. If you are by Mr. Li's side, then Mr. Li will be distracted by you and will not be able to have a good rest at all. This made Sunian's face suddenly look ugly. What do you mean by this? It's like I'm a burden. It's a pity that I took such good care of this guy just now. If you don't let me stay here, I won't stay. It makes me feel like I'm a rare person. Sunian left directly. Li Baikan sighed deeply, then put his hand on his forehead. He seems to have messed up. Is this God's retribution for pretending to be ill? End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Wich Jong Word. Chapter 429. Chapter 429. Josu, do you want to double the bonus? Sunian just walked to the living room and stopped. Josu, do you want to double the bonus? After hearing this, Josu immediately understood what Sunian meant, and then said against his will, I don't want to. Sunian turned to look at him, don't you really want to? As the first secretary beside Baikan, your bonus, especially the year-end bonus, is also a very considerable number. If this number is doubled. Josu, madam, you'd better leave quickly. If you go back quickly, you can still have breakfast with me. Sunian, twice. Josu, this is not a matter of money, it's Mr. Li's order. Sunian, 3 times. Josu. 3 times the bonus. It was impossible for Josu not to be moved. But he knew very well that he had to be rational. After all, if something happened to the person in front of him, let alone the bonus, he would definitely be unlucky. I know what you are worried about. I won't be close to Baikan. I will just stay in the living room. When Baikan's situation stabilizes, I will return to my old house. If you agree, then when Baikan gets better, I will ask him to give you 4 times the bonus. If Baikan doesn't give it to you, then I will give it to you myself. When he said this, Sunian paused and said, on the other hand, if you don't listen to me, are you sure you will have a good life? Josu's expression changed. You know better than anyone how favored I am now. You said that if I wait until Baikan gets well, I can whisper something in his ear, Josu. Josu was still struggling after hearing this, and immediately said with a serious face, Madam, you must promise not to go near Mr. Li's room. If you get sick, let alone Mr. Li, even the old man can't spare me. I'll just sit here and play, and won't get close. Sunian sat on the sofa. If you are still worried, then ask the doctor to prescribe some preventive medicine for me. After all, I slept with him yesterday. Sleeping together. Josu hurriedly went to make arrangements. In this way, Sunian sat in the living room for the next 3 days, listening to the family doctor's report. When it was finally confirmed that Li Baikan had nothing to do, she breathed a sigh of relief and asked Josu to send him back to his old home. When getting out of the car, Sunian smiled and said to Josu, Josu, tell your boss Li that I am angry. If he can see me within the next month, then I will take his surname. When Sunian asked him to send her back to her old home, Josu had an ominous premonition. Madam, please don't embarrass me. Josu, you can't get 4 times the salary for nothing. After saying this, Sunian turned around and walked towards the old house. As Li Baikan's wife, she has done all the things she should do, but as Sunian, she still has a bit of a temper. Speaking so strongly. Snored. She, a vicious female supporting role, has been busy for so long, so she needs a holiday. Wait, she will go find the old man now and sue Lee Baiken severely. Josu saw Sunian's back and suddenly felt that he had no love left in his life. It's really a fight between gods, and the little devil will suffer. Sure enough, when Lee Baiken heard this, he sighed helplessly. He really felt like he was screwed now. After all, in order to get better quickly these days, he has been cooperating with the doctor's various treatments and taking a good rest, just hoping to get better soon. End of this chapter. The vicious female supporting character's character collapsed after her voice was eavesdropped. Author, R.O. Wich Jong Word. Chapter 430. Chapter 430 The Old Man's Fishing Experience. But at this moment, Lee Baiken suddenly realized something. You just said that you just sent Sunian back. She has not been staying in the old house these days, so how could you send her off? Lee Baiken looked at Josu. Hope to get some idea from Josu that Sunian is talking angrily. Even a little bit. Under Lee Baiken's gaze, Josu said helplessly, Mr. Lee, in fact, my wife has been here these days, just keeping watch in the living room. In the afternoon, I learned from the family doctor that there is nothing wrong with your body. Question, let me send her back to her old home. Let's put it this way, Josu has been witnessing the whole process of Sunian going to worry about getting angry these days. Why didn't you tell me? Josu lowered his head. I can't help it, my wife gave me too much. 4 times the salary is really great. Lee Baiken didn't expect that Sunian actually guarded him for 3 days. He was happy and knew that he had really made her angry this time. Moreover, he could tell from Josu's words that not only was he angry, but he was also not very angry. So coaxing. After all, Sunian has always acted like she loves herself on the surface. Now that she says this, it means that she doesn't even act and is really angry. Hey, I have a headache. When Sunian appeared in front of the old man angrily, the old man was fishing. Baiken is ready. The doctor said he's fine, Dad, don't worry. Although she felt uncomfortable, Sunian still remembered that the old man was worried about Lee Baiken, so he put away his expression. The old man picked up the fishing rod and fiddled with the bait. Who says I'm worried? I'm not worried about that brat. That brat is as strong as a cow. What could happen to him? He glanced at this point. Take a look at Sunian's face next to him. Of course the old man knows what happened these days, and he also knows that someone has completely messed up. If a father doesn't see his son's jokes, then he will be a father in vain. Nian, fishing also requires skills. If you put too much bait, the fish will be full and you won't be able to catch any fish, and a waste of carefully crafted bait. Sunian immediately understood what the old man meant. She also felt that she was a little too nice to Lee Baiken. Although her character as a vicious female supporting character was also mindless, she felt that she had to change her thinking. After all, let alone seeds now, there is just no minced meat at all. And she couldn't get the seeds, so she still felt a little uneasy. Even if he has decided to let this guy Lee Baiken live. So she thought she would give Lee Baiken a break first, at least to see Lee Baiken's attitude. Old Shen, why can't I catch these fish? Replace all the fish for me and replace them with a batch of good ones. Sunian recovered his thoughts and saw the old man throwing the fishing rod directly to the ground. Sunian, can this fish still be obedient? Good fishing. After the old man finished his instructions, he looked at Sunian again. Nian, although fishing is a very simple thing, there is a lot of knowledge involved in fishing. If you stay with me these days, I will slowly teach you. Sunian nodded obediently, but can this knowledge really be learned? Okay, now that Baiken is well, you should stay here. Well, by the way, don't run away in the middle of the night. Sunian, promise not to run away. She will definitely not run away this time. End of this chapter.